On a quiet stretch of road just outside a small rural town, a luxury car sat motionless, its sleek exterior gleaming under the afternoon sun. Inside, Ethan Cole, a man accustomed to the finer things in life, was seething with frustration. A flat tire had brought his journey to an abrupt halt, leaving him stranded with no phone signal and no help in sight. As he stepped out of his car, adjusting his tailored suit in the blazing heat, he had no idea that a chance encounter with a local boy named Marcus would alter the course of both their lives forever. Marcus wasn't just any kid. What started as a simple act of kindness, changing a stranger's tire, would soon uncover secrets, spark transformations, and lead to one of the most unexpected twists of fate. But what could a billionaire like Ethan possibly owe to a boy like Marcus? And how could this brief interaction ripple out to change an entire community? Let's dive into this heartwarming story of generosity, ambition, and redemption. But first, let us know in the comments where you're watching from today. And if you enjoy stories with unexpected twists and inspiring moments, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss what comes next. Now, let's begin. The road stretched endlessly under the scorching summer sun, surrounded by nothing but open fields and patches of dense trees. Ethan Cole tapped his fingers impatiently against the steering wheel of his jet-black sports car. He checked his watch, muttering under his breath. The high-stakes meeting he was rushing to would have to wait. "Of course," he grumbled, stepping out and slamming the car door. The flat tire stared back at him, mocking his helplessness. Ethan, a man who rarely dealt with inconveniences, hadn't changed a tire in his life. The heat hit him like a wall as he adjusted his tie and looked down the deserted road. He scanned the horizon for any signs of life. Nothing. Frustrated, he pulled out his phone, only to find that his signal bar was empty. "Fantastic," he muttered. "Stranded in the middle of nowhere. This day just keeps getting better." As he debated whether to attempt the repair himself, a figure appeared in the distance, moving steadily closer. Squinting against the sunlight, Ethan saw it was a young boy. Marcus, just 14 years old, was walking home after helping his mother at their roadside produce stall. His faded sneakers kicked up dust with every step, and his backpack hung loosely on one shoulder. "Hey, mister," Marcus called out as he got closer, a curious expression on his face. "Got trouble with your car?" Ethan straightened, wary but intrigued. "Yeah," he admitted reluctantly. "Flat tire and no signal to call for help." Marcus smiled, setting his bag down. "I can fix it. My dad taught me how. You got a spare?" Ethan blinked, surprised by the boy's confidence. Yeah, I think so. But are you sure? This isn't exactly child's play." Marcus chuckled, shaking his head. "It's just a tire, mister. No big deal." Reluctantly, Ethan nodded and opened the trunk to reveal the spare and a set of tools. Marcus got to work without hesitation, loosening lug nuts and jacking up the car with a skill that left Ethan watching in silence. "Where'd you learn to do this?" Ethan finally asked, more to break the awkward quiet than anything else. "Like I said, my dad. He's always fixing things. Cars, machines, you name it," Marcus replied, his voice steady as he worked. Ethan studied him more closely. The boy's clothes were worn but clean, his demeanor polite but confident. There was something about Marcus, his easy smile, his calm attitude, that made Ethan pause. After about 15 minutes, Marcus stood up, brushing dust off his hands. "All done," he said, giving the tire a final pat. Ethan looked at the repaired wheel in disbelief. "You really know what you're doing," he said, reaching for his wallet. He pulled out a crisp $50 bill and held it out to Marcus. "Here, for your trouble." But Marcus shook his head, stepping back. "Nah, I don't need that. Just wanted to help." Ethan frowned, the bill still extended. "Are you sure? It's the least I can do." Marcus grinned and picked up his backpack. "You don't have to pay someone just for doing the right thing. Take care, mister." And with that, Marcus slung his bag over his shoulder and started walking down the road, whistling as he went. Ethan stood there, frozen, watching the boy disappear into the distance. The $50 bill hung limply in his hand. For someone who had spent his life building empires, closing deals, and measuring success in dollars and cents, this interaction left him shaken. Who was this kid? As Ethan climbed back into his car and continued down the road, he couldn't shake the image of Marcus from his mind. Something about the boy's sincerity had struck a chord, a feeling Ethan hadn't experienced in years. By the time Ethan reached his mansion later that evening, he was still thinking about Marcus, and somewhere deep in the back of his mind, a seed of curiosity had begun to grow. The sun was beginning to dip lower in the sky, casting golden hues over the long stretch of road. Ethan sat in his car, staring at the boy working diligently on the tire. There was a rhythm to Marcus's movements, steady, confident, and entirely unbothered by the situation. Ethan couldn't help but notice the contrast between his own mounting frustration earlier and the calm, almost cheerful demeanor of this teenager. "Where do you live?" Ethan asked, breaking the silence. Marcus glanced up briefly, still focused on loosening the lug nuts. "Not too far from here, just a mile or two down that way." He nodded toward the direction he had been walking. "You were just walking in the middle of nowhere?" Ethan asked, his tone half skeptical, half curious. Marcus shrugged. "I walk a lot. School, helping my mom at her stall, running errands. Not much choice when you don't have a car." Ethan tilted his head, intrigued. "Your mom has a stall? What does she sell?" "Produce," Marcus replied, now swapping out the flat tire for the spare. "Fruits and vegetables, whatever's in season. She's been running it since I was little. I help her out when I can." There was no trace of complaint in the boy's voice, just matter-of-factness. Ethan tried to imagine a life like that, a life of walking miles daily, working at a roadside stall, and fixing cars for strangers. It was a far cry from the world he lived in, where inconveniences were handled by assistants or services at the push of a button. "Doesn't that get exhausting?" Ethan asked, genuinely curious. Marcus tightened the bolts on the new tire and sat back on his heels, wiping his hands on his jeans. He seemed to think about the question for a moment before responding. "I guess. But it's just how things are. Complaining doesn't fix anything, right? You just do what needs doing." Ethan was taken aback by the simplicity of the answer. There was no bitterness in Marcus's tone, no self-pity. Instead, there was an air of quiet resilience that Ethan couldn't quite wrap his head around. "You seem like you've got a good head on your shoulders," Ethan said, almost to himself. Marcus grinned, standing up and brushing the dust from his knees. "Thanks, mister. My mom says the same thing, though she usually adds, 'If only you'd keep your room clean.'" For the first time in hours, Ethan let out a genuine laugh. "Moms always have a way of keeping us humble, huh?" Marcus nodded, his grin widening. "That they do." The tire was fixed, and Marcus stepped back, gesturing toward the car. "You're good to go now." Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. He fished out a crisp $100 bill, holding it out toward Marcus. "Here, for your time and effort. You've been a big help." Marcus's expression shifted, his grin fading into something softer, more serious. He shook his head firmly. "I don't need that, mister." Ethan blinked, stunned. "Come on, take it, you earned it." Marcus took a step back. slinging his worn backpack over his shoulder. "I didn't do it for the money. You looked like you needed help, so I helped. That's all." Ethan stared at him, the bill still hanging in midair. "Nobody does anything for free these days," he said, his voice edged with disbelief. Marcus shrugged. "Maybe. But my mom says if you can help someone, you should. No strings attached." Ethan lowered his hand slowly, still processing what Marcus had said. In his world, everything had a price. Every favor, every gesture, every deal. This boy's outlook felt foreign, almost naive. Before Ethan could say anything more, Marcus raised a hand in a casual wave. "You take care now, mister, and try not to hit any more potholes." Ethan chuckled despite himself, watching as Marcus turned and began walking down the road again. The boy's silhouette grew smaller and smaller as he headed off into the fading sunlight. Ethan climbed back into his car, placing the $100 bill back into his wallet with a strange mix of emotions swirling inside him. As he started the engine and pulled back onto the road, his thoughts were anything but clear. For years, Ethan had built his life around the pursuit of success. He had worked tirelessly, climbed corporate ladders, and amassed a fortune that most people couldn't even dream of. Yet, here was a kid, barely old enough to drive, teaching him something he hadn't considered in years: the value of kindness without expectation. Ethan replayed the encounter in his mind as he drove. The way Marcus had worked so effortlessly, the way he'd refused the money, the way he'd walked away without even waiting for a thank you. It was unsettling in a way Ethan couldn't quite explain. By the time he reached the outskirts of the city, the neon lights and bustling streets snapping him back to reality, Ethan felt a nagging curiosity he couldn't ignore. Who was this kid? What kind of upbringing instilled such a sense of selflessness? Ethan pulled into the driveway of his sprawling estate, the automatic gates closing behind him. The mansion loomed ahead, sleek and modern, every line and detail a testament to his wealth and success. But tonight, it felt emptier than usual. As he stepped inside, greeted by the cold silence of the grand foyer, Ethan realized how long it had been since someone had surprised him. His world was predictable, controlled, a series of calculated moves. Marcus's act of kindness had thrown him off balance, and he wasn't sure why it mattered so much to him. Ethan tossed his keys onto the marble counter and sank into the plush leather couch in his living room. He stared at the ceiling, the boy's words echoing in his mind. "If you can help someone, you should." It was such a simple philosophy, yet it carried a weight Ethan couldn't ignore. He picked up his phone, scrolling through his contacts. He had people who could track down anyone, anywhere, with just a few details. All he had to do was make the call. But what would he say? Instead, Ethan set the phone down and leaned back, closing his eyes. For now, he'd let the moment sit with him. But deep down, he knew this wasn't the last time he'd think about Marcus. Not by a long shot. As the night wore on, Ethan found himself staring out the window at the distant city lights, his mind still preoccupied with the boy on the side of the road. And somewhere, in the quiet corners of his heart, a seed of something unfamiliar began to grow. It wasn't just curiosity, it was a need to do something, to act, to understand. And as much as Ethan tried to push the thought away, it refused to leave. This boy, with his worn sneakers and bright smile, had left a mark, one Ethan couldn't ignore. Tomorrow, he decided, he'd start finding answers. Ethan tossed and turned in his massive bed that night, the soft glow of the city lights streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. His room, impeccably designed with minimalist decor and expensive artwork, felt unusually cold and empty. No matter how much he tried, he couldn't stop thinking about Marcus. The boy's smile, the confident way he worked, the unwavering refusal of a reward, it all replayed in Ethan's mind like a loop. Marcus was unlike anyone he had met in years. His words lingered too. You don't have to pay someone just for doing the right thing. Ethan sighed, sitting up in bed and rubbing his temples. It wasn't just Marcus's act of kindness that stuck with him. It was how much the boy reminded him of someone he used to know. Himself. Decades ago, Ethan Cole wasn't a billionaire. He was a scrappy, ambitious kid from a modest neighborhood, fixing bikes and running errands to help his mom make ends meet. Back then, life was simpler but harder. He remembered the long days spent hustling, the nights wondering how they'd pay rent, and the quiet pride he felt every time he could ease his mother's burden, even a little. But as time passed and success became his focus, Ethan had buried that part of himself under layers of wealth, ambition, and attachment. He hadn't thought about his roots in years. Yet now, a boy with worn sneakers and a determined smile had unearthed it all with a simple act of kindness. Ethan climbed out of bed, pacing the room. He couldn't just let this go. There was something about Marcus, something he couldn't ignore. By morning, Ethan was already at his desk, a steaming cup of coffee in hand. His sleek laptop hummed softly as he began typing an email. He didn't need to search far. His network of resources was unparalleled. If anyone could track down Marcus, it was his assistant Elena. Elena, Ethan wrote, I need you to find someone for me. His name is Marcus, about 14 years old. I met him yesterday on a rural road near Cedar Hollow. Lives nearby, probably in a small community. I'll need details on his family, background, everything. Thanks. He hit send and leaned back in his chair, his thoughts still on Marcus. He didn't know exactly what he was looking for or why this mattered so much, but he felt compelled to act. A few hours later, Elena called. Ethan, she began, her voice crisp and professional as always. I found him. Ethan straightened in his chair. That was fast. What do you have? Marcus Allen, Elena continued. Lives with his mother, Vanessa Allen, in a small rented house near Cedar Hollow. His father passed away a few years ago in a work-related accident. The mother runs a produce stall by the main road to make ends meet. Marcus helps her when he's not at school. Ethan felt a pang in his chest. What about their financial situation? Strained, to say the least, Elena replied. They're behind on rent, and the landlord has been threatening eviction. The produce stall brings in some income, but it's barely enough. Marcus is a bright kid, though, top of his class, according to school records. He's even been doing odd jobs around the community to help his mom. Ethan sat silently, absorbing the information. A vivid picture of Marcus's life began to form in his mind. The long walks, the tire repair, the cheerful demeanor despite obvious hardships. It all made sense now. Anything else? Ethan asked. Elena hesitated for a moment. I looked into Vanessa's health. She's been seeing a local clinic for chronic back pain, probably from years of physical labor. The medical bills are piling up too. Ethan clenched his jaw. He didn't know Vanessa or Marcus personally, but the unfairness of their situation hit him like a punch to the gut. He thought about how much effort it must have taken for Vanessa to keep her family afloat and how Marcus, at such a young age, was already carrying so much responsibility. Thank you, Elena, Ethan finally said. That's all I need for now. After hanging up, Ethan stared out the massive window of his office, his thoughts racing. He felt a strange mix of guilt, anger, and determination. Guilt for having spent so many years in his bubble of privilege, anger at the system that left people like Marcus and Vanessa struggling, and determination to do something about it. Ethan had the means to change lives, to make a difference. And yet he had spent years focused solely on his own success. Marcus's act of kindness had opened his eyes to something he had been ignoring for far too long. The decision was clear. Ethan needed to meet Marcus and his family again. The next morning, Ethan left his mansion in a sleek black SUV, his driver navigating the winding roads toward Cedar Hollow. The further they drove from the city, the more the scenery changed. Towering skyscrapers gave way to rolling fields, and bustling streets turned into quiet country roads. Finally, they arrived at a modest neighborhood, where small houses stood shoulder to shoulder, some showing clear signs of wear and age. Ethan stepped out of the car, his polished shoes clicking against the cracked pavement. The Allen house was easy to spot. It was small and slightly worn, with chipped paint and a sagging porch. But there was a warmth to it, a sense of resilience that Ethan couldn't quite put into words. As he approached the door, he could hear faint voices inside, one cheerful and familiar. He knocked firmly, and the sound of footsteps followed. The door opened, and there stood Marcus, his eyes widening in surprise. "Mister, what are you doing here?" Ethan smiled. "Thought I'd check in. Is your mom home?" Marcus stepped back, his curiosity evident. "Yeah, she's here." "Mom, someone's at the door." A moment later, Vanessa Allen appeared. She was a tall woman with kind eyes that carried the weight of years of struggle. Her hands were rough, and her posture hinted at discomfort, likely from the chronic pain Elena had mentioned. "Can I help you?" Vanessa asked cautiously, her gaze flicking between Ethan and the shiny SUV parked outside. Ethan extended a hand. "My name's Ethan Cole. I met your son yesterday when he helped me with my car. I just wanted to thank him properly." Vanessa hesitated but shook his hand, her grip firm. "Marcus told me about that. Said you had a flat tire." "That's right," Ethan replied, glancing at Marcus, who was now standing off to the side, watching with interest. "Your son's a remarkable young man. He wouldn't even let me pay him for his trouble." Vanessa gave a small smile, her pride in Marcus evident. "That sounds like him." Ethan's expression grew serious. "I learned a little about your situation, and I'd like to help. If you'll let me." Vanessa's smile faded, replaced by a guarded look. "We're doing just fine, Mr. Cole. We don't need charity." "It's not charity," Ethan said quickly, his tone sincere. "Your son reminded me of something I'd forgotten, the importance of helping others. I'd like to repay that kindness by supporting you and Marcus in whatever way I can." Vanessa studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Finally, she sighed, glancing at Marcus. "What do you think, baby?" Marcus shrugged, his smile returning. "He seems okay, Mom. Besides, I think he really means it." Vanessa gave a reluctant nod. "All right, Mr. Cole. You're welcome to sit and talk, but I'm not promising anything." Ethan nodded, stepping inside the modest home. It was small, but filled with signs of love. Family photos on the walls, colorful handmade curtains, and the faint smell of freshly baked bread lingering in the air. As Ethan sat down at the kitchen table, he realized he wasn't just here to repay a favor. He was here to change lives, and maybe, just maybe, his own life would change in the process. Ethan couldn't stop thinking about the Allen family. After meeting Marcus and Vanessa the day before, he felt an even stronger urge to help them. Not out of pity, but because they had reminded him of the values he had strayed from over the years. That night, as he sat in his expansive living room, his mind raced with ideas. His assistant, Elena, had been instrumental in uncovering the family's challenges, but now it was up to him to decide how to make a real difference. By morning, Ethan had a plan. The next day, he loaded the back of his SUV with carefully selected gifts. It wasn't just about material things. Every item had a purpose. Groceries to stock their pantry, educational supplies for Marcus, and a set of tools for Vanessa's produce stall. Practical things that would ease their day-to-day struggles. As his driver navigated the familiar road to the Allen home, Ethan felt an unfamiliar twinge of nervousness. He wasn't used to approaching people on such personal terms. Deals, negotiations, and boardroom meetings, those were his comfort zones. But this was uncharted territory. When the SUV pulled up in front of the Allen house, Marcus was already outside, sweeping the small porch. His eyes lit up the moment he recognized the car. "Hey, mister," Marcus called out, leaning on the broom handle with a wide grin. Ethan stepped out of the vehicle, waving back. "Morning, Marcus." "What brings you back so soon?" Marcus asked, curiosity sparking in his tone. Ethan motioned toward the SUV. "I brought a few things for you and your mom. Thought they might come in handy." Before Marcus could respond, the front door creaked open and Vanessa stepped out. Her expression was cautious, her arms crossed tightly across her chest. "Mr. Cole," she said, her tone polite but wary, "what's all this about?" Ethan smiled warmly, gesturing toward the back of the SUV. "I wanted to bring a few things for you and Marcus. Groceries, some supplies for the stall, and a couple of extras I thought might be useful." Vanessa's brow furrowed, and she exchanged a glance with Marcus, who looked equally surprised. "That's very kind of you," she said slowly, "but we don't usually take handouts." "It's not a handout," Ethan said quickly, his tone earnest. "Think of it as a thank you gift for what Marcus did for me. His act of kindness reminded me of something important, and I just wanted to show my appreciation." Vanessa hesitated, studying Ethan carefully. Her experience had taught her to be cautious of people bearing gifts, especially ones as wealthy and polished as Ethan Cole. But there was something genuine in his demeanor, something she couldn't quite dismiss. "Marcus, help him unload the car," she said finally, her tone softening just a bit. Ethan smiled in relief. "Thank you, Vanessa. I think you'll find these things helpful." Marcus eagerly ran to the back of the SUV, his curiosity bubbling over as Ethan opened the trunk. His eyes widened at the sight of the supplies. "Whoa, mister," Marcus exclaimed. "This is a lot." Ethan chuckled. "Just a few things to make life a little easier." Together, they carried bags of groceries, a new set of tools, and a small stack of books and notebooks into the house. Marcus's excitement was contagious, and even Vanessa couldn't suppress a small smile as she watched her son's enthusiasm. Once everything was inside, Ethan took a seat at the kitchen table, feeling the warmth of the small, lived-in space around him. Vanessa joined him, still cautious but visibly more relaxed. "Mr. Cole," she began, her tone firm but not unfriendly. "I appreciate what you've done here, but I have to ask, why? Why go out of your way for us?" Ethan leaned forward, resting his hands on the table. "Vanessa, your son reminded me of something I'd forgotten a long time ago. He helped me without expecting anything in return. He didn't care about who I was or what I could offer. That kind of selflessness, it's rare." Vanessa's expression softened, though she still looked unsure. Ethan continued, his voice steady. "I grew up in a situation not too different from Marcus's. My mom worked hard to provide for me, and I did everything I could to help her. Somewhere along the way, I lost touch with that part of myself. Meeting Marcus brought it all back, and now I want to give back. To him and to you." Vanessa's gaze dropped to the table, her fingers tracing the edge of a well-worn placemat. "We've always managed on our own," she said quietly. "I can see that," Ethan replied gently, "and I admire it, but sometimes it's okay to let someone help. Marcus helped me when I was stuck, and now I want to do the same for you." Vanessa looked up, meeting his gaze. There was no hint of condescension in his tone, no expectation of gratitude. He seemed genuine, and that was something Vanessa didn't encounter often. "All right," she said finally, her voice tinged with emotion. "Thank you, Mr. Cole, for everything." Ethan smiled, relieved. "You're welcome. And please call me Ethan." "Okay, Ethan," Vanessa said, her lips curving into a small smile. Marcus, who had been quietly flipping through one of the new notebooks, looked up with a grin. "You're pretty cool for a rich guy, Ethan." Ethan laughed, ruffling Marcus's hair. "I'll take that as a compliment." The rest of the morning was spent unpacking and organizing the new supplies. Ethan took the time to listen to Marcus and Vanessa talk about their lives, the challenges they faced, the little victories they celebrated, and the dreams they held onto despite the odds. By the time Ethan left, the house felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted. As he climbed into his SUV and drove away, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. He had come to repay a favor, but he was leaving with something much greater. A sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. As the days passed, Ethan found himself spending more time with Marcus and Vanessa. Each visit deepened his understanding of their lives, their challenges, and their strengths. What struck him the most was Marcus's spirit, a bright, unyielding optimism that seemed to shine no matter how difficult things were. One warm afternoon, Ethan stopped by the Allen house again, this time carrying a small toolbox. He found Marcus sitting on the porch, tinkering with an old radio. "Hey, Ethan," Marcus greeted, not looking up as he carefully turned a tiny screwdriver in his hand. "This thing's been busted for weeks. Thought I'd see if I could fix it." Ethan leaned against the porch railing, watching him work. "You always seem to be fixing something, don't you?" Marcus grinned. "Well, if something's broken, might as well try, right?" Ethan chuckled. "That's a good philosophy. Where'd you learn to do all this?" Marcus shrugged, still focused on the radio. "My dad, mostly. He used to fix things all the time. Cars, radios, appliances, whatever needed fixing. He said it was like solving a puzzle, and I guess that stuck with me." Ethan's gaze softened as he watched Marcus. The boy's hands were nimble, his expression one of quiet determination. It wasn't just a hobby for Marcus. It was a skill, a passion. "Have you ever thought about what you want to do when you're older?" Ethan asked, genuinely curious. Marcus finally looked up, tilting his head thoughtfully. "I've thought about it," he admitted. "I really like building and fixing things. Maybe I could be an engineer or something like that. Someone who designs stuff to help people." Ethan's eyebrows rose. "An engineer? That's a big dream." Marcus nodded, his eyes lighting up. "Yeah, but I don't just want to build cool gadgets or machines. I want to make things that help people, like fixing up houses or creating tools that make life easier for folks who don't have much." Ethan couldn't hide his admiration. At such a young age, Marcus had already developed a clear vision for his future. And it wasn't rooted in self-interest. It was about helping others, just as he had helped Ethan on that road. "That's an incredible goal," Ethan said, his voice sincere. Marcus smiled but quickly looked away, fiddling with the radio again. "It's just a dream. I don't know if it'll ever happen." "Why not?" Ethan pressed. Marcus hesitated, his movements slowing. College costs a lot of money, and it's not like we have any saved up. Mom's always telling me not to worry about it, but I know it's hard enough just keeping the lights on. Besides, he added with a small laugh, dreams are free, right? Ethan's chest tightened at Marcus's words. The boy's potential was undeniable, but the obstacles in his path were just as clear. You know, Ethan said, leaning forward slightly, I've been thinking about something. You've got a lot of talent, Marcus, and a lot of heart. I'd like to help you make that dream a reality. Marcus paused, looking up at Ethan with a mixture of surprise and uncertainty. What do you mean? I mean, Ethan continued, I'd like to mentor you, help you with your education, get you the resources you need to succeed. If you want to be an engineer, I can help you get there. The boy stared at him, his expression unreadable. Why would you do that? Ethan's voice softened. Because you've got potential, Marcus, and because you reminded me of what it's like to dream big, even when the odds are against you. I want to see you succeed, not just for yourself, but for the people you want to help. Marcus shifted uncomfortably, setting the radio aside. I don't know, Ethan. It sounds too good to be true. It's not, Ethan assured him. There are no strings attached. This isn't a business deal, it's a chance for me to give back, just like you gave to me that day on the road. Marcus hesitated, clearly torn. He had grown up learning to be cautious of offers that seemed too generous. Life had taught him that nothing came without a cost. What if I mess up? Marcus asked quietly. What if I can't do it? Ethan smiled. Then you try again, and again if you have to. Nobody gets it right all the time, Marcus. Success isn't about never failing, it's about not giving up. The boy looked down at his hands, his mind racing. He wanted to believe Ethan's words, but the idea of someone investing in him like this felt almost overwhelming. Can I think about it? Marcus asked after a long pause. Of course, Ethan replied gently. Take all the time you need. Just know that the offer stands no matter what. Marcus nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. Thanks, Ethan. Ethan stood, ruffling Marcus's hair as he did. No rush, kid. Just remember, you've got everything it takes to make it. All you need is a little support. As Ethan walked back to his SUV, he felt a sense of satisfaction mixed with anticipation. He knew Marcus needed time to process everything, but he also knew the boy had what it took to succeed. Back on the porch, Marcus picked up the old radio and resumed his work. As he turned the screws and adjusted the wires, his mind buzzed with thoughts of the future. Could he really do it? Could he become the person he dreamed of being? One thing was certain. Ethan's belief in him had sparked something. A flicker of hope he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a long time. Ethan knew building trust wouldn't happen overnight. Vanessa and Marcus had spent years navigating life on their own, and accepting help from someone like him, a wealthy stranger, wasn't an easy leap. But Ethan was patient, determined to show them that his intentions were genuine. The next week, Ethan made it a point to spend time with the Allens. He showed up with small, thoughtful gestures. Fresh fruit for Vanessa's stall, a set of better tools for Marcus to use when fixing things around the house. He never overdid it, careful not to overwhelm them. Vanessa, though still cautious, began to soften. She appreciated Ethan's efforts to listen and understand, rather than swoop in and make assumptions about their needs. Marcus, on the other hand, had warmed up to Ethan quickly, seeing him not as some rich guy, but as someone who genuinely cared. One afternoon, as they sat on the porch sharing lemonade and conversation, Ethan turned to Marcus with a thoughtful expression. "Hey, Marcus," he began, setting his glass down. "How would you feel about visiting my company? I'd love to show you what we do." Marcus's eyes widened with a mix of excitement and hesitation. "Your company? You mean like where you work?" Ethan chuckled. "Exactly. We work on projects all over the world. Engineering, technology, innovation. I think you'd find it interesting." Vanessa, who had been sitting nearby, looked up sharply. "What kind of company is it, Ethan?" Ethan turned to her, his tone respectful. "We specialize in creating solutions for large-scale problems. Architecture, infrastructure, even renewable energy. It's all about making things work better and helping communities thrive." Vanessa's expression softened slightly. "And you want Marcus to see this?" Ethan nodded. "I think he'd enjoy it. It's one thing to hear about engineering, it's another to see it in action." Marcus grinned, his excitement finally spilling over. "Can we go, Mom, please?" Vanessa hesitated, her protective instincts warring with the hope in her son's eyes. Finally, she nodded. "All right, but only if Ethan promises to bring you back safe and sound." Ethan raised his hand in a mock salute. "You have my word, Vanessa." The next morning, Ethan arrived at the Allen house early, dressed casually to put Marcus at ease. Marcus bounded out of the house, practically bouncing with excitement. "Ready?" Ethan asked with a smile. "Ready," Marcus replied, climbing into the SUV. The drive to Ethan's company headquarters was filled with chatter. Marcus asked endless questions about the business, the projects, and how Ethan got started. Ethan answered each one patiently, impressed by the boy's curiosity and quick thinking. When they arrived, Marcus's jaw dropped. The building was a towering structure of glass and steel, its modern design a testament to the company's innovative spirit. "This is where you work?" Marcus asked, his voice tinged with awe. Ethan chuckled. "It's one of the places I work. Come on, let's go inside." As they walked through the sleek lobby, Marcus's eyes darted everywhere, taking in the futuristic decor and the bustling activity of employees moving with purpose. Ethan led him to an elevator, and they rode up to one of the top floors. Their first stop was the design lab, where engineers and architects worked on cutting-edge projects. Ethan introduced Marcus to a few team members who greeted him warmly and took the time to explain their work. "Check this out," one of the engineers said, pointing to a 3D model on a large touchscreen. "We're designing a sustainable housing community for an area affected by flooding. These homes are elevated and use eco-friendly materials." Marcus's eyes lit up as he watched the demonstration. "That's amazing. You're building houses that won't get destroyed when it rains too much?" "Exactly," the engineer replied, smiling. As they moved through the lab, Ethan watched Marcus closely. He could see the wheels turning in the boy's mind, his excitement growing with each new project they encountered. Next, they visited the production floor, where prototypes were being built and tested. Marcus marveled at the machinery, the precision of the work, and the energy of the people who clearly loved what they were doing. "This is incredible," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. Ethan placed a hand on his shoulder. "This could be you one day, Marcus. With your talent and passion, you could be designing and building things like this." Marcus turned to him, his expression a mix of disbelief and hope. "You really think so?" "I know so," Ethan said firmly. "All it takes is hard work and the right opportunities, and I'll help you with both." After the tour, they went to Ethan's office, a spacious yet inviting room with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking view of the city. Ethan handed Marcus a soda and leaned back in his chair, watching the boy's expression as he absorbed everything he had seen. "You've got a lot of potential, Marcus," Ethan said after a moment. "But more importantly, you've got the right mindset. You care about helping people, and that's what makes all the difference." Marcus stared at the soda can in his hands, his thoughts swirling. It just feels like a dream. Being here, seeing all this, I never thought someone like me could do something like this. Ethan leaned forward, his tone serious but encouraging. "I used to think that too, but you're already ahead of where I was at your age. You've got the skills, the smarts, and the heart. The only thing standing between you and your dreams is opportunity, and I want to make sure you have it." Marcus looked up, his eyes shining with a mix of gratitude and determination. "Thanks, Ethan. I'll work hard. I won't let you down." Ethan smiled. "I have no doubt you'll do amazing things, Marcus. Just remember, this isn't about proving anything to me or anyone else. It's about believing in yourself." They spent the rest of the afternoon talking about Marcus's aspirations in more detail. Ethan shared stories from his own journey, including the mistakes he made and the lessons he learned along the way. By the time they left the office, Marcus's view of the future had transformed. He no longer saw his dreams as distant or impossible. For the first time, he felt they were within reach. As they drove back to Cedar Hollow, Marcus turned to Ethan with a big smile. "I'm going to be an engineer," he said with confidence. Ethan chuckled. "I never doubted it for a second." When they arrived at the Allen house, Vanessa was waiting on the porch. Marcus practically jumped out of the car, running up to her with an excitement that made her laugh. "Mom, you won't believe it. Ethan showed me his company, and it was amazing. I saw houses they're building, machines they're making. It was so cool." Vanessa smiled, looking over at Ethan with a nod of gratitude. Ethan stepped out of the car, watching Marcus excitedly recount his day. "He's got big dreams, Vanessa," he said quietly, "and I'm going to make sure he gets every chance to achieve them." Vanessa's expression softened, and for the first time, Ethan saw a glimmer of trust in her eyes. "Thank you," she said, her voice filled with emotion, "for believing in him." Ethan smiled, feeling a sense of fulfillment he hadn't experienced in years. "It's easy to believe in someone like Marcus," he replied. And as he drove away that evening, Ethan knew he wasn't just changing Marcus's life, he was rediscovering his own purpose. Ethan's growing connection to Marcus and his family inspired something he hadn't felt in years, a deep-seated desire to make a difference not just for one boy, but for an entire community. Over the following weeks, Ethan began visiting Cedar Hollow more frequently. Each trip revealed more about the challenges the town faced. The small rural community had charm, but its struggles were obvious. Poorly maintained roads, an aging school building, and limited opportunities for young people like Marcus. One morning, as Ethan sat on the Allen family porch, sipping coffee with Vanessa and watching Marcus repair an old bike for a neighbor, he turned to her with a thoughtful expression. "Vanessa," he began, "what do you think this town needs the most?" Vanessa looked at him, her brow furrowing. "That's a big question, Ethan. There's a lot that could use fixing. The school could use some upgrades. The roads are in bad shape and there aren't enough jobs to keep people here. Most of the young folks leave as soon as they can." Ethan nodded, his mind already racing with possibilities. "It's a good town," Vanessa continued, her voice soft. "People here work hard and they care about each other. But it's tough when you feel like the world's forgotten you." Ethan leaned back, staring out at the quiet streets. He had the resources to make a real impact, and for the first time in his life, he felt compelled to use them for something more meaningful than another business venture. "I want to help," he said firmly. Vanessa tilted her head, studying him. "You've already done so much for Marcus and me. You don't have to." "It's not about what I have to do. Ethan interrupted gently. "It's about what I can do. This town has potential, just like Marcus does. It just needs someone to invest in it." Ethan started small, focusing on immediate needs. His first project was the local school, a modest building that had seen better days. He quietly funded repairs to the roof, new desks for the classrooms, and updated technology for the computer lab. The transformation was swift, and the impact was immediate. Students who once struggled with outdated equipment now had access to modern tools, opening up new possibilities for learning. Next, Ethan turned his attention to the roads. Cedar Hollow's bumpy, pothole-ridden streets made travel difficult, especially during the rainy season. Partnering with a local construction company, Ethan financed a project to repave the main roads, ensuring smoother, safer travel for everyone. Word of Ethan's efforts began to spread, both in Cedar Hollow and beyond. At first, the townspeople were skeptical. Why would a wealthy outsider care about their small, struggling community? But as the improvements became visible and lives began to change, skepticism gave way to gratitude. "He's not just throwing money at us," one resident said. "He's listening. He cares about what we need." Ethan didn't stop there. He also started a youth mentorship program, inspired by his relationship with Marcus. The program connected local kids with professionals in various fields, offering guidance, skill building, and inspiration for the future. One Saturday afternoon, Ethan invited Marcus to join him for a town meeting he had organized. The gathering took place in the newly refurbished school gym, where dozens of residents had come to hear about Ethan's plans for Cedar Hollow. Marcus sat beside Ethan, glancing nervously at the growing crowd. "You sure about this, Ethan?" he whispered. Ethan smiled, placing a reassuring hand on Marcus's shoulder. "Trust me, you'll be fine." When it was time to speak, Ethan stood and addressed the audience. He spoke about his initial encounter with Marcus and how it had inspired him to look beyond his own world. "The day on the side of the road," Ethan said, his voice steady, "Marcus showed me the power of kindness and generosity. He reminded me that even small acts can have a big impact, and that's why I'm here, not to change Cedar Hollow, but to help it become the best version of itself." The audience broke into applause, and Marcus couldn't help but smile as he looked up at Ethan with admiration. Ethan continued, outlining his plans to create more opportunities for the community, funding for small businesses, scholarships for students, and a new community center where people could gather, learn, and grow. When Ethan sat back down, Marcus leaned over. "That was amazing," he said. Ethan chuckled. "Thanks, kid, but this is just the beginning." As the weeks turned into months, Ethan's efforts began to bear fruit. The community center was built, becoming a hub of activity where kids attended after-school programs, adults took job training classes, and neighbors gathered for events. Marcus spent much of his free time at the center, volunteering to help with repairs and mentoring younger kids. Watching him interact with others, Ethan couldn't help but feel proud. "You're a natural leader," Ethan told Marcus one day as they worked side by side painting a wall at the center. Marcus shrugged, a shy smile on his face. "I'm just doing what you taught me, helping people when I can." Ethan shook his head. "You were doing that long before I showed up, Marcus. You're the one teaching me." Their bond grew stronger with each passing day. Ethan wasn't just a benefactor to Marcus. He had become a mentor, someone the boy could trust and rely on. One afternoon, as they sat on the community center steps, watching kids play in the newly built playground, Marcus turned to Ethan. "You know, I used to think I'd have to leave Cedar Hollow to make something of myself," Marcus said. "But now, I think I can make a difference right here." Ethan smiled, his heart swelling with pride. "You can do both, Marcus. Build your future and give back to your community. It's not an either-or choice. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. I like that. Ethan's work in Cedar Hollow didn't go unnoticed. Stories of his generosity and the transformation of the town began circulating in the media. Articles were written, news crews visited, and people from other communities reached out, inspired by what he had done. But the most profound impact was felt in Cedar Hollow itself. Ethan's actions sparked a ripple effect, inspiring others to pay kindness forward. Neighbors who had once been distant began working together, volunteering at the community center, and supporting one another in ways they hadn't before. For Ethan, it wasn't just about the projects or the recognition. It was about the relationships he had built. The Allens had become like family to him, and Cedar Hollow felt like home. One evening, as the sun set over the town, Ethan and Marcus sat on the porch of the Allen house, watching the streets come alive with laughter and conversation. "You've done a lot for this place," Marcus said, his voice filled with gratitude. Ethan shook his head. "We've done a lot, Marcus. This was a team effort." Marcus grinned. "Well, I'm glad you're on my team, Ethan." Ethan smiled back, feeling a warmth he hadn't experienced in years. "Me too, kid, me too." The years passed quickly, as they often do when life begins to move with purpose. For Marcus, those years were a whirlwind of growth, learning, and discovery. From a determined teenager in Cedar Hollow to a graduate of a prestigious engineering program, Marcus never forgot the foundation of support that had made it all possible. One crisp autumn morning, Ethan sat on the porch of his estate overlooking the sprawling gardens. His once fast-paced life had slowed down, but it hadn't lost its meaning. Cedar Hollow's transformation over the years had left an indelible mark on him. And so had Marcus, who had gone on to chase dreams bigger than either of them could have imagined. Ethan was sipping his coffee when the sound of a car pulling up broke the silence. He set his mug down, curious about the unexpected visitor. When the door of the car opened and a familiar face stepped out, Ethan's heart swelled with pride. It was Marcus, but not the boy Ethan had met on a dusty rural road all those years ago. This was Marcus Allen, the young man who had grown into his potential. He was confident, polished, and yet still had that same warmth in his smile that Ethan remembered so well. "Ethan!" Marcus called out, his grin wide as he approached. "Marcus!" Ethan stood, meeting him halfway and pulling him into a firm handshake that turned into a hug. "Look at you. It's been too long." Marcus laughed, his voice deeper but just as genuine. "Too long indeed. I've been meaning to visit, but you know how life gets." "Don't I know it?" Ethan said with a chuckle, guiding Marcus to the porch. "Come on, sit. Tell me everything." As they settled into the comfortable chairs, Marcus looked around, taking in the view. "This place hasn't changed much," he said, smiling. "Neither has Cedar Hollow," Ethan replied, "though it's a little livelier these days, thanks to a certain kid who inspired some big changes." Marcus shook his head, laughing. "You're giving me too much credit." "No, I'm giving you just the right amount," Ethan said, his tone serious. "So, tell me, what's new in your world?" Marcus leaned back, his gaze thoughtful. "Well, for starters, I'm officially an engineer now," he began. "I've been working on projects that focus on sustainable housing and infrastructure, things that can really make a difference in underserved communities. It's everything I dreamed of and more." Ethan smiled, his chest swelling with pride. "I knew you'd do it, Marcus. You've always had the heart for it." Marcus's expression grew softer. "I wouldn't be here without you, Ethan. You didn't just help me. You believed in me. And that made all the difference." Ethan shook his head. You're giving me too much credit now. You did the hard work, Marcus. All I did was give you a nudge in the right direction." Marcus leaned forward, his voice earnest. "It wasn't just a nudge. You showed me what was possible. You made me believe that someone like me could make a difference. And that's something I'll never forget." The two sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the weight of their shared history settling between them. Finally, Marcus broke the quiet. "You know," he said, "I've been trying to pay it forward. Back home, I've started a mentorship program for kids like me, kids who need someone to show them that their dreams aren't out of reach. I figured if you could do it for me, I could do it for them." Ethan's heart swelled. "That's incredible, Marcus. You've become exactly the kind of person I always knew you could be." Marcus smiled, but his eyes were serious. "It's all thanks to you. That day on the road, when you took the time to really see me, to care, it changed everything." Ethan looked out at the horizon, his thoughts drifting. "You know, Marcus, I think about that day a lot. I didn't stop to help you, you stopped to help me. And in doing so, you reminded me of something I'd forgotten. The power of kindness, of generosity without expectation. It wasn't me who changed your life, it was you who changed mine." Marcus didn't respond right away, letting the words sink in. Finally, he nodded, his voice quiet but firm. "Maybe we changed each other." Ethan turned to him, his smile tinged with emotion. "Maybe we did." As the afternoon stretched into evening, the two talked about their lives, their dreams, and the impact of the choices they'd made. Marcus shared stories of the kids he was mentoring, their struggles and triumphs. Ethan listened, his pride in Marcus growing with every word. "You've created something amazing," Ethan said. "Not just in your career, but in your heart. That's where real success lies." Marcus grinned. "I had a good teacher." Ethan laughed. "I'll take that compliment. But you've taken it further than I ever could, and that's exactly how it should be." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in hues of gold and pink, Marcus stood to leave. He extended a hand to Ethan, who took it firmly. "Thank you, Ethan," Marcus said, his voice steady. "For everything." Ethan looked at him, his eyes glistening. "No, Marcus. Thank you." As Marcus's car disappeared down the driveway, Ethan returned to the porch, sitting in the quiet glow of the evening. He reflected on the journey that had brought them here, the ripple effects of a single act of kindness. What had started as a chance encounter on a lonely road had grown into something so much bigger, proof that even the smallest actions could change lives. Ethan smiled to himself, a sense of peace settling over him. He had built empires, amassed wealth, and achieved every material goal he had ever set. But nothing compared to the fulfillment of seeing Marcus thrive, of knowing that his support had sparked a chain reaction of hope and generosity. And as he sat there, watching the first stars appear in the sky, Ethan felt a certainty he hadn't felt in years. This was the legacy that mattered. Not the buildings, not the fortune, but the lives he had touched. The story doesn't end here. What will Marcus do next to inspire others? What new challenges will he face in his mission to help others? If you want to follow more stories like this one, stories of kindness, transformation, and the incredible power of human connection, be sure to click on the next video. Together, we can keep the ripple going. Subscribe now, and let's keep making a difference.